all time. I promise you, not in the good sense. I'm just starting the streaming. I will tell you in just a second when we are live.
Okay.
Okay, we are live now, Nahum. So I want to welcome you to the dialogue 2021.
I emailed you and I asked how long should I take the let's say opening remarks.
Yes, so we have about an hour, but it's completely flexible. It can be a bit longer, it can be a bit less, it doesn't really matter. If you go for an hour and a half, it's still fine.
No. What I really am curious, to hear and to learn from the questions of the people who will attend it.
So I would suggest if you speak for, let's say, give us a round a view of what's going on in Israel and your region for 30 minutes, 35 minutes, then I will interject myself with my own questions out of what you said, and then we'll open the floor to the members that are joining us. And then Alan Howe, that you've met. Alan Howe is one of our famous journalists in Australia. He's also the executive director of the organization here in Australia. And he will be gathering all the questions. And through him, you will be hearing the voice of all those that you cannot see or hear. So, Alan, you here, by the way? Can I just ask technically, you are there, Alan?
I am, Albert. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I still can't see you.
Well, Nahum will be very pleased by that.
All right. So, Nahum, the floor is yours. And welcome again.
Wow. Okay. I'll try to start. So we are what? We are three now, or?
No, there are many more that are joining us as we speak. You cannot see them because they are, how the Zoom webinar works. They're the observers. And then we are also live currently on YouTube and Facebook.
Okay, I'll pretend that we have a chat.
And that's exactly
people, between us and the rest will enjoy it.
That is, we are having a chat, so it's absolutely correct.
Okay. Let me start by an very old story about Tony Blair and Boris Yeltsin. Tony Blair, who was the Prime Minister of Britain, asked once Yeltsin, how is the situation in Russia in one word? So Yeltsin said, good. So he said, you know what? Tell me the situation in 2 words. So he said, no good. So it means that Yeltsin was ambivalent about Russia. My description of this political situation in Israel will be a bit positive and a bit negative, quite mixed sum up of the first 6 months of the current Israeli government. Now you have to understand that our political problems are even more complicated than Australia's. You can imagine. We have now a coalition of 61 members in the Knesset, in our parliament, which has 120 members. And the opposition is more united than in the past. So it may and much more combative than in the past. So it means that in order to have a majority, the coalition has to really to be in the Knesset most of the time. The result, it's quite bizarre. For example, there is a member of the coalition, a female member, who just gave birth to her son, I believe, or daughter, to a daughter. She, the head of the coalition, the chairperson of the coalition, asked her to come 3 days after the birth to the Knesset in order to vote, in order to avoid a situation that the opposition will have the majority. So we are. It's quite unique in the history of Israel that the fight between coalition and opposition is not played, once in a month or once in 2 weeks, but it is played daily during the session of the Knesset. So this is one aspect that forces the coalition to work hard, and the government or the minister of the government to spend a lot of time voting. So this is one aspect. They try to solve it by passing a Norwegian law, something which I'm not sure you in Australia follow, but in Norway, members of the government can resign from the parliament and be replaced by other people who were in the list in order to give them more time for work, for executive work. So in Israel too, at least half of the government are not members of the Knesset now, something which looks very arbitrary and not very natural, because we have a parliamentary system like you. So if you have a parliamentary system, you expect that the government will be present in the parliament, and so they passed a law. Anyway, let's talk about the issues on the agenda of this government. This government is headed by Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who is, by the way, who is now in the Emirates, the first Israeli Prime Minister who is invited to an official visit in the Emirates, something quite important. We'll talk about it later. Mm-hmm. So the issues on the table, the agenda. First of all, Iran. And here this is really the bad news. While the superpower are sitting with Iran in Vienna, sitting and not sitting, it's a big drama in Vienna. The government of Israel doesn't have really a solution to the problem that that we face with Iran, namely the nuclear project of Iran, and even more, or not less than the nuclear project, other military initiatives by Iran that has a lot of bearing on Israel and also on the rest of the world. Now, as you know, in 2018, President Trump, under a lot of pressure from Israel, decided to quit the agreement, which forced Iran to stop the enrichment in Iran and gave them and forced the United States to lift some of the sanctions against Iran. So Trump retained the sanctions, but allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium. They got to a level of 60%, and for them, it's only a matter of weeks to get to the 90% level. 90% level allows them to develop a nuclear bomb. They cannot launch it. They don't have yet warheads or missiles that they can really directly threaten Israel. But this is a fact that that let's say this is the number one priority in any strategic debate in Israel and any calculation by the government. The government of Netanyahu, Netanyahu himself took pride in the fact that he fought against the agreement with Iran, and he convinced Trump to quit. The outcome was not exactly positive. I would say, in hindsight, we see how negative it was, because Iran had the freedom and still has the freedom to enrich as much as they want, and the sanctions didn't force the government of Iran, the Ayatollahs, to crumble. So we face now a real problem. The new government deals a lot with criticism toward Netanyahu and his government, but they don't have an easy solution for the problem. What they demand now from the United States is not to go for any agreement, any new agreement with Iran, especially an agreement which will be less for less, which will give Iran some some relief from the sanctions, and Iran in return will promise to temporarily freeze the enrichment. This is not a solution Israel wants. Israel is looking for a solution which will either abolish the project or deal seriously or continue what we called maximum pressure on Iran through the sanctions, through the economical sanctions. So again, we are dealing here with very clever and ideological enemy, which says, plainly, they time and again they say that their objective is to destroy Israel. It doesn't mean that this is what they do, but for the Israelis, it looks like the time of Nazi Germany when the final solution hanged in the air. So for Israel, it's a real, tangible threat, and the assumption in Israel is that if the United States could try to apply much more pressure on Iran, to be much more serious regarding a military action, but United States, under Biden or under Trump or under Obama, is not in the mood to start a new military confrontation in the Middle East. So it means that Iran has a free hand to go on. So this is one big issue. I would say it overshadows any other issue. The second issue is the pandemic. And here, you in Australia, you try to deal with it your way. Here, the government was much more successful. The principle they endorsed was, let's keep the economy working as much as we can. So in the 6 years of the existence of this government, there was no lockdown in Israel. As a matter of fact, life is quite normal here. But we look in a kind of, some kind of anxiety toward what we call the fifth wave of the pandemic, namely the new virus, what the experts here believe is that we cannot escape from from massive penetration of this virus, and it means that we will have to impose some new restrictions on normal life in Israel. To what extent it will get it's not clear yet. But you know, we are now in the beginning of a process which can end up in a lockdown even, but not yet. It's the beginning, and the number of people who are sick now in the hospitals, who are hospitalized, is less than 100, which means that we see the gathering of the storm, but the storm is not here yet. Okay, so these are the two big issues. There are a lot of other issues you have to take into. You have to understand that this government is composed by parties from the right, from the center, and from the left, including an Arab party. It means that from the beginning, it was clear that this government cannot make decisions which deals with the axis of left to right. You know, the number, for example, of this government will it will be very difficult for this government to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority, for example. On the other hand, it is very difficult for this government to recognize any illegal settlements in the West Bank. It will not easy for this government to start a kind of military operation in Gaza. All these things find this government or all these things threaten the unity or the capacity of this government to operate. So they started from a very timid, a very limited pretense to do some kind of revolutionary initiative. At the same time, they are quite successful in the continuation of our of progress regarding United the Emirates, the Emirates, regarding Bahrain, all the oil countries, including Saudi Arabia, which is still in the closet, but cooperate with Israel nevertheless, and toward Europe and United States. So in foreign policy, we are in relatively good shape. Regarding the economy, we are in good shape. We had a growth of, I believe, 6%, more than 6% this year. It was more than what the OECD projected, and the COVID-19 year helped a lot our economy, because our economy is based on the high-tech industry, and the high-tech industry had a very good year. So because the economy is strong, the government can spend more money on security. This is the link to Iran. We can prepare better for any confrontation with Iran, which can happen in the next few years. But we have the money to do it, and we also had the money to make some kind of improvements in social issues. not radical things, but still good things. Now, regarding the public opinion, this government doesn't enjoy yet a widespread trust by the people. It's not a popular government, because in recent years, like other countries, like United States, for example, the Israeli society was divided between two very, very separate blocks, one right-wing bloc, one left bloc, and there was a real a lot of suspicion, a lot of tension between the two blocks. A government which has the right and the left in it is suspected by both sides. So we have if you look at public polls, the government is not very popular. At the same time, the opposition doesn't have, even in public polls, they don't have the majorities they need in order to overthrow the government. So we look at the situation quite stable, but not very happy, if you see what I mean. The government is, there is no real immediate threat to the existence of the government, but there are daily problems which expose the government to public criticism. And they have to make decisions. Like United States, by the way, it's very hard for them to nominate people to senior positions because the opposition is against it, and because the government is divided between eight parties, which have, each party has a different agenda and different ambitions, and each of them is looking to the general public in order to gain some kind of popularity for the next elections. I don't know if this is enough to tempt you,
yes,
or to encourage you to open the floor to questions.
Yes. Well, before let me ask you a couple of questions of my own, if you want.
Sure. I can assure you that there are more questions than answers.
In Israel, that's the way. Yeah. Absolutely, always.
Yeah, we have two questions to every answer.
So I just would like to turn, before we turn to the government, I just want to turn to Bibi Netanyahu. So it's important for people to know that even though he lost the election, he remains the opposition leader, and he seems to have a solid ambition to get back to be the prime minister. Sure. And can you please update us on the legal troubles that he's facing, and if you can remind us what those troubles are?
Okay. First of all, Netanyahu didn't have a very good week because of two reasons. One, a new book that was published only this week about the Abraham agreements with the Emirates and the way the Trump and his son-in-law Jared Kushner pushed for it. There is an interview with Trump in this book written by a very, very intelligent Israeli journalist. And he went to Trump, and Trump was very, very outspoken, and he accused Netanyahu for betraying him. And why he believes that Netanyahu was ungrateful and betrayed him, because Netanyahu, like any other leader in the free world, congratulated Biden for his elections. So for Trump, it was an insult, and especially because it was in a video kind of monologue, and now retroactively Trump understands that Netanyahu was not his friend from the beginning and betrayed him all the time. So this was a kind of soap opera interview. And in this,
what is the name of the journalist?
Barak Ravid.
Barak
He's
Ravid.
working for Barak Ravid.
And I believe you've been very kind. I've heard of him, but you've been very kind because Donald Trump used the F word when talking about Bibi.
Yeah, I always remember what Harry Truman said about friends in Washington. If you want a friend in Washington, buy a dog. And so all this idea of world leaders or leaders of countries who are personal friends is overstated all the time. I mean, let's not exaggerate. And in this case, Netanyahu behaved or reacted really as the Israeli prime minister. I mean, Israel cannot afford to not, it's not the business of Israel to make a judgment about an election in the United States or in Australia, for that matter. So Netanyahu did what Macron and Merkel and others have done, but Trump felt that it's a personal insult because he doesn't recognize the results, the outcome of the American elections. So this was one thing. By the way, I believe that Netanyahu, for Israelis, the attack of Trump only strengthened the popularity of Netanyahu, because in this case, he acted according to what people expect from their prime minister. He did what he should have done. So, okay. The other bad news for Netanyahu, and maybe you will laugh, but for him it's an important matter. He wanted to extend the bodyguard service which his wife and his sons get from our security service. It was done when he still was prime minister. He extended it to the time when a year, and ignored the fact that he was on his way out. Now the government came after 6 months and said enough is enough. So, and he complained about it a lot, and he see it somehow it's part of his sense of victimization. He's a victim. So yesterday, I believe, or yesterday, they stopped guarding his 2 sons. One of them is very active politically. And now Netanyahu has a dilemma. If he believes that his family is under a real dangerous threat, he has to pay for new guards, to pay from his own bank account, something which Netanyahu is not very enthusiastic to do. So I don't know what will happen, but everybody is looking at Netanyahu to see how he will behave. Now, regarding his trial, it's quite interesting. We are only the beginning of a very long trial, which will probably end with some kind of plea bargaining. We don't know, but so far, only 2 witnesses appeared on the stand on the podium, and there are a lot of headlines. But in legal terms, you have to understand that this trial is done by it's 2 trials at the same time. One is done in the court in front of 3 judges. The other trial is done in the court of public opinion. And the lawyers who work for Netanyahu are working at the same time on the court of public opinion. And I would say they work more in the court of public opinion than in the court in Jerusalem. So you have these two things affect the phase and the way this trial goes on. Now, what are the matters in the trial? There are 3 separate matters. One is very simple, but not very big. It is called Case 1000, and it deals with presents that Netanyahu and his family got from billionaires, one of them Australian, by the way. And the basic premise is that...
Talking about James Packer.
Yeah, I'm talking about James Packer. The premise is that Netanyahu really got an assembly line of quite expensive presents and gave in return some kind, not in the case of Packer, but in the case of others, gave in return some kind of government benefits. Now, this is a simple matter, relatively simple, but in the eyes of the public, it looks minor. We are talking about a supply, constant supply of champagnes, of alcohol, of cigars, not something which can impress, not cash money, and not something that can impress the public, but still it is a criminal matter. Now, the 2 other cases are more complicated, but at the same time more important. One deals with my paper, Yediot Ahronot, and my publisher, and it is based on recordings which were made under the instruction of Netanyahu, of conversations between him and my publisher, Noni Moses, regarding some kind of changes in the contents of the paper. And in return, Netanyahu will see to it that another free tabloid that was sponsored by an American billionaire, this tabloid will print a smaller number of copies in return for a softer editorial policy of Yediot Ahronot.
Is there a reason you don't want to say the name of the newspaper and the name of the late billionaire because he just passed away?
Okay. The late millionaire is Sheldon Adelson. The name of the tabloid, the free tabloid, is Israel Hayom, and the name of the paper which I'm working for is Yediot Ahronot. This is it's a complicated matter, not only because the whole subject of contents is not exactly a natural issue when it comes to bribe or to criminal matter, but also because the 2 persons, Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Moses, never really did anything in order to implement what they said in these recorded conversations. So all this case called the case 2000 was brought to trial because of one reason: to help the prosecution in the 3rd case, which is the case 4000. And this is the serious case. And I believe that the whole affair will be decided on the 3rd case. There was an Israeli tycoon called Alovich, who owned a very big communication company called Bezek. It was a monopoly in Israel for many years. The company which gives you landline telephones, cellular telephones, and the other method, and it was very, very strong, very, very big.
Mhm.
Now, this company wanted to have benefits from the government, which was about 1 billion shekels, something which is in American dollars, it should be around a quarter of $1 billion American dollars. Netanyahu decided to become the Minister of Communication, which is the regulator of this company. And he insisted on doing it. And when he became Minister of Communication, he did all he could to help this company. At the same time, this company had an internet site, an internet news site called Walla, which and every day the Netanyahu and his family demanded from this site to be more positive and to help the political and the trade and the public relations efforts of Netanyahu. So you have this kind of complicated relations. This is the heart of the trial, and we'll see what happens with it.
And was there a story about submarines, or that was dropped?
It's not on the trial. It's not on this trial. The story of the submarine will, it's a lot different trial, and Netanyahu is not part of it right now. Regarding the submarines, there is a public demand, I would say, endorsed by at least half of this government, to have a commission of inquiry regarding the decisions Netanyahu has made during the purchase of the submarines, and the building of the submarines in Germany. But the commission of inquiry was not nominated yet. And anyway, the trial, the criminal trial regarding submarines, there Netanyahu is not one of the defendants. He was not even, I believe, they didn't force him even to answer questions, criminal questions regarding his behavior. Not yet.
Okay. So as what I'm hearing, what my friends are telling me in Israel is that he's undergoing a campaign to undermine the current government, and he's apparently the cause of the fallout inside the government. Apparently there are some tensions, and the public is starting to drop their support for Bennett already. I mean, you would be hard pressed to think whether a coalition of so many partners with so many coming from so many diverse political backgrounds. I mean, you've got a party in there that does not even believe in the state of Israel. And at the opposite end, you've got Mr. Bennett, that is an absolute Zionist, in my view. So you could make a prediction that by Bibi Netanyahu rocking this boat, do you think that you might get again to an election in 2022? How do you see the longevity of this government?
Albert, there is an irony here. The irony is that Netanyahu is the real glue which allowed this government to proceed, because the only agenda or the only consensus they have there is that they shouldn't bring Netanyahu back to government. And their animosity toward Netanyahu is only growing because of his behavior in the opposition, which is so combative. So what I see, so in a way, for them, it's a blessing that Netanyahu is there, and Netanyahu, like Trump in the United States, dominates his party and the whole opposition. And the whole opposition is mobilized, is recruited by Netanyahu to his own sake, for his own sake. So Netanyahu is not exactly the negative this government faces. I'm not sure it will be easy for them to proceed if Netanyahu decides to quit politics. I don't know. But this is the irony. Anyway, I'm not going to make predictions regarding 2022. If you want predictions, I can bring you predictions about the next century or the next millennium. It's fragile,
yes,
but it holds. It holds because sometimes, in politics, fragile governments manage to hold because they are fragile, because every member of the coalition knows that if he digs a hole in the boat will drown. So in a way, I don't want to bet, but so far it looks as if we will have this government at least until the beginning of 2023, when Mr. Bennett will have to be replaced by Mr. Lapid as the prime minister. They have this kind of arrangement that Mr. Bennett is the prime minister and Mr. Lapid is the alternate prime minister. And after 2.5 years of government, they will have to exchange seats. Mr. Bennett will become the alternate and Mr. Lapid will become the prime minister. So I guess along the way, they will become weaker and weaker because they will see elections in the horizon, and they will have enough. They will have a lot of reasons to fight each other. But so far, it looks as if they are quite persistent in their decision to go on.
And I believe Lapid is doing a good job as a foreign minister. That was something that Israel was missing, it seems, to have a foreign minister for a number of years, as Bibi was occupying many seats. That was one of them. So let's take that as a segue to what's happening around Israel. So you've got a situation with Hamas now that is starting to be a little bit out of control. Hamas is now apparently building rockets and other arms in Syria. And I heard that just a few days ago, Israel has bombed those sites where Hamas...
In Lebanon.
Was it Lebanon, not Syria? I see. So that's... so tell us about this. And what do you see is happening there? Because now it seems that they went from little Qassams to serious missiles, and now they're going to the next step. So what does that mean for the South?
Yeah, never a dull moment when you deal with the security of Israel and the Middle East as let's say a heaven for any terrorist movement. But Hamas, we as a matter of fact, we see now several, I believe, months of relative quiet in the Gaza front. Hamas is ambivalent about its role because they have to give the 2 million people who live in Gaza some kind of decent existence, some kind of welfare. So Israel, and again, the government here made the right decision. Israel opened the gates for workers from Gaza to Israel, and so far, this pours cash money into Gaza. It's very important, and Israel is also trying, with the help of Egypt, to get a kind of long-term agreement with Hamas in Gaza. It doesn't mean that Hamas in Turkey is not trying to encourage Hamas activists in the refugee camps, the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, to start attacking or to prepare for an attack toward Israel. In our, let's say, vicinity, in our neighborhood, Hezbollah is a much more serious enemy than Hamas, because Hezbollah gets precise missiles from long-range missiles from Iran, and also the know-how to produce this kind of missiles. And these missiles can threaten Israel and can overshadow any confrontation we have with Iran. I will say this: while Iran is 1,500 kilometers from Israel, Iran is only 10 meters from Israel, because in the Syrian front and the Lebanon front, Iran is very active. Mm-hmm. So you see how we are. The equilibrium is not very balanced. We have a problem attacking Iran. They have no problem dealing with us militarily. Israel reacts to it by attacking Iranian militias in Syria all the time, and also Iranian military stockpiles, and any effort by Iran to transfer weapons from Iran to Syria and Lebanon. And it's quite successful. I would say that Iran so far has a problem. They have a problem in Syria. I'm not sure President Assad is very sad when Israel is attacking Iranians in Syria. And they have a problem in Lebanon. Lebanon is in a very bad shape. So we deal, I would say this, that we manage to keep the Iranians at bay in Syria and in Lebanon so far.
There is one player that we don't hear about when it comes to the Iranians' arms race now, and that's Turkey. Yet Turkey has just sent an ambassador to Tel Aviv. They are reopening their diplomatic relations with Tel Aviv. Is that an effort of Lapid? Is that thanks to Lapid, or was that happening independent of him? What do you attribute that to? And also, please analyze for us quickly, what is that an ambivalence message? Because at the same time, Erdogan is supporting Hamas, yet is opening up to Israel. And does he have a role to play with what's happening in Iran?
Look, you went to Turkey, not Qatar, because Qatar is.
Beg your pardon, did I say Qatar? Lapsus. I was thinking of Qatar before when you said about Hamas. They're obviously financing all of Hamas in the south. But no, I meant Turkey, of course. I was talking about Erdogan.
Yeah, okay. So look, our problem with Turkey is very personal. The name of the problem is Erdogan. Because if you look at the general public in Turkey, if you look at the security establishment, defense establishment, we have a very, very long history of cooperation and the collaboration between the Israeli government and the Turkish government, military, intelligence, whatever. Now, Erdogan, somehow Israel was a problem in, a kind of a problem he couldn't swallow when he developed a kind of vision. He will be the Sultan of the Middle East, the major force here. It didn't materialize. And he has grave economical problems in Turkey, and also has a very delicate front in Syria. His army is inside Syria and facing the Iranians there. So he sends to Israel mixed messages in recent, I would say, weeks or months, ideological animosity and willingness to cooperate at the same time. This is the reason you mentioned, and you were right, that the diplomatic relations are a bit better now. What I see is Israel and Turkey have to prepare to the days after Erdogan. And after Erdogan, I believe some kind of much more sympathetic relations will develop. You have to understand that in normal times, hundreds of thousands of Israelis go to Turkey every year. It's for Israelis, this was the #1 tourist attraction, Turkey. So you don't see the kind of hatred you expect to see when you listen to Erdogan's speeches. Now, regarding, and he, again, ideologically is pro-Hamas, but he doesn't send a meaningful aid to Hamas. Now, another, if I may, irony. Qatar is really an essential power in between us and Hamas. They give Hamas a lot of money. Who encourages Qatar to do it? Israel. So Israel wants Qatar to help Hamas. At the same time, we fight Hamas all the time. So it's not an easy region, the Middle East. And formally, by the way, we don't have diplomatic relations with Qatar, but a lot of Israeli businessmen and tourists are going there every year. So everybody sends kind of contradictory messages.
How does it manifest itself, Nahum, that Israel encourages Qatar to give money to Hamas? How is that happening? I mean, there's no diplomatic relation, as far as I know, between Qatar and Israel. They're not part of the Abraham Accord. So what I was reading was that Israel is trying to find ways to stop this funds transfer between Qatar and Hamas, and you're saying the opposite. So can you tell us more, please?
What I'm saying is this. During the Netanyahu government, there was an emissary from Qatar who came to Israel every, let's say, month or 2 months with suitcases full of cash money. And we allowed him to go to the border, to cross the border, and to give the money to Hamas in order to convince Hamas not to launch rockets toward the territory of Israel. Now, the current government, especially the Prime Minister, Bennett, promised during the elections that if he will become part of the government, the cash money will not go to Gaza anymore. The Qatari money will not go to Gaza. But when he became Prime Minister, he realized that if Gaza doesn't get this assistance, this aid from Qatar, we will be in trouble because they have enough rockets to launch to Israel, thousands and thousands, they can do it all the time. So what they did was to develop a better system for allocating the money. The money is not, the money is given through the UN. This is the idea which is they develop now, that the money will go through the UN and will go directly to people, and the government of Hamas will have on a very limited control over the pouring of the money. So yes, Qatar is encouraged by Israel. No cash money.
Very good. Thanks for the explanation. Alan, how can we open the floor, please?
Yes, Albert. Nahum, good to catch up again. Can I ask, Benjamin Netanyahu was opposed to the nuclear deal with Iran and quickly accused Iran of cheating on that. But what do Israelis make of that deal? And would most Israelis look at that nuclear deal as really a fairly simplistic blackmail?
I'm sorry, I lost you, I'm afraid.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether, can you hear me now? No?
Alan, can you explain it in a different way, please?
Yep. I'm wondering whether Israelis look at
Okay, I'm back, right? Am
Yep.
I? Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm asking.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry. Yeah, Ellen.
Okay, so I'm asking whether Israelis, the population, not the government, whether they look at the deal that used to exist with Iran and may be resuscitated, the nuclear deal, whether they look at that as blackmail.
And Albert, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
With great difficulties, I'm afraid. Alan, can you please?
Okay, no, we'll move on to another question. Nahum,
Yeah.
the banking and economic sanctions against Iran, how damaging are they, and could they be made to be crippling?
The sanctions regarding Iran, it all depends. It all depends first of all on the United States. I mean, the United States can even implement more sanctions on Iran because the United States is the center of the transfer of money in the global market. They can simply freeze all the financial activities of Iran. At the same time, we have to take into consideration the fact that China, who is one of the participants in the agreement with Iran, China, because of the tensions with the United States and because of many other reasons, including oil, is now very, very close to Iran. And they cooperate with Iran. They don't join the sanctions. They don't boycott businesses with Iran. So Iran has a very big market for oil. It helps Iran to survive during the sanctions. The sanctions didn't manage to break Iran's will. This is what we have seen since Trump, and this is the reason the United States is so eager to have to look for a different way, to have an agreement with Iran and not to continue with the sanctions.
To outsiders, Nahum, the Abraham Accords look terrific and they're welcome. But it doesn't mean that Arabs in those nations have changed their hearts and minds about the existence of Israel. And isn't that what Israel really needs?
Yeah, when you look at our public opinion, what you call the Arab street, the answer is quite gloomy. I believe that the Arab street, when it comes to big countries like Egypt, which has peace with Israel, or even Jordan, which has peace with Israel, when you look at the way they still find it very difficult to accept the existence of Israel as part of the Middle East. But if you look at governments, for the Sunni governments in the region, Israel is not only the country, the strongest country in the region, or the strongest country which is anti-Iran, anti-Shiite Iran in the region. It is also even more important when they realize that United States is in a weaker position and the United States wants out. So if United States is not there, they have only two options: either to get some kind of understanding or some kind of cooperation with the Iranian Shiites regime, or to cooperate with Israel. They still have the choice, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they can always join the Iranian camp. So now they are playing, they get closer and closer to Israel because of Iran. We said before that Netanyahu is the glue which holds this government. I can say also that Iran is the glue which makes Israel and the oil kingdoms of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so on, closer to Israel. You have this kind of cooperation. What will happen in the end? Several weeks ago, the Emirates sent a minister to Tehran. They still play between. I talked with one of the top generals in the IDF several days ago, and I said to him, what is your position regarding the Emirates when they try to have better relations with Iran? He said, this is the reality of the Middle East. We are going to become very close to Emirates, and the Emirates will continue courting Iran. This is the reality.
Nahum, you talked earlier that you spoke about the Israeli economy doing quite well, and you said that's good because that allows us to prepare for the possibility of confrontation with Iran.
Yeah.
What would that confrontation look like?
Wow. Ellen, it's a very good question. It's a very good question. There is a debate in Israel, even over the question of the question, do we have a military option regarding Iran? This is a debate which started, I believe, in 10 years ago, and there was some efforts. It cost us about $3 billion at the time to prepare for an aerial attack of the nuclear sites in Iran. At the end, because of many reasons, one of them is the opposition of all the top echelon of all the Israeli defense services, the IDF, the Mossad, the security service, and so on. They said that actively against it. But anyway, now the Iran nuclear sites are much more protected because they are deep in the mountains, and it will be very difficult to attack it. And there is another very serious question: what Iran will do afterwards, even if we are successful. So the question is open. At the same time, a responsible Israeli government have to prepare to an Iranian attack, which means we should have enough military power to deter Iran from doing it, or if the situation becomes worse, to react if they try. So a lot of money is going now to, for example, the development of laser weapons against missiles, the development of Israeli rockets capacity, and also on cyber, something which Israel developed quite successfully in the past, but we have to invest more in it.
Nahum, I'll just go back to the original question. I'll put it in another way. Do most Israelis look at the nuclear deal that was struck with Iran and see it as blackmail?
Is it blackmail, you said?
Yes.
You mean
so blackmail by whom? By Israel?
No, by Iran. Iran is saying
by Iran. Yeah. Look, I mean, there is no ethical or moral qualities in the negotiation which takes place now. Yes, they blackmail the superpower. Yes, they are quite successful in it. Yes, I'm sorry that the United States doesn't have a more, let's say, a more demanding approach to the negotiations. I believe that they could do more. But
you mean more for more?
More for more, not less for less. Exactly. Yeah. But if you there is no moral dome hover or exist beyond the Vienna negotiations. We don't. There is no morals there.
But the interesting part, Nahum, is that the Americans aren't even negotiating with the Iranians. They're doing so through the Europeans, and they don't have a direct dialogue with the Iranians. It's really, the whole thing is a head scratching. The entire affair there is really not good for the United States image. It's not good for the stability of the allies. Looking at America and trying to take a cue from there, it's a real tough one. Anyway, Nahum, I think that we get towards the end, and I have one question which you don't need to answer. I hear that someone has become the head of the Mossad, and he has your surname, Daddy Barnea. Is that your nephew?
No. Maybe my grandfather. Why?
or your grandfather.
No. I don't. I knew quite well Yossi Cohen, the previous head of Mossad. I don't know David Barnea, who is the head now. Barnea is a Hebrew name which the people who carry it were born, most of them, with a different name, and they changed it. I changed it, and I guess the new head of the Mossad changed it too. I guess this will be the opening of the meeting I will hopefully have with this Mr. Barnea, and we will check all the family tree, and we will decide that there is no relation.
And you should interview him, especially with the comments that he made recently, that under his watch, Iran is not going to have a nuclear arm. I think that should be reassuring for every Israeli.
Yes and no, because the Mossad is not in charge of history or of the decision made.
Well, not officially anyway.
By the government. You know, when with all the due respect to the name Barnea and to the head of the Mossad, he is only a civil servant. If a civil servant wants to insist on this promise, and the government makes a different decision, he will have to resign, I guess. But this is not what assure the Israelis. What should assure the Israelis is a better, I would say, a clearer Israeli strategy and end game. And this is something which the government cannot give the Israeli public right now.
Nahum, I thank you very much for your address and for answering our questions generously. I can tell you that we have people in the audience, members in the audience that are watching from France, from the UK, from Australia, and Israel, of course. So well done. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you next year in person. I certainly do.
Okay. And I wish you a better lockdowns or even, you know.
Enough lockdowns. Please wish us no more lockdown, please.
Okay.
Please.
I hope the world will
Thank you.
The pandemic will be over as soon as summer ends in Australia.
Thank you very much. And everyone, in 20 minutes, we're going to join our UK friends. Thank you, Nahum.
Bye-bye.
Bye.